All right, so I think that we have given the requisite amount of time for people to arrive. I think we have a very nice group that came today. And so I just want to make a couple remarks before we begin. First of all, thank you all for attending today and supporting the society. We are just about to start figuring out who our officers for the coming year will be. And we have a nominating committee already in place. But I would like to open up the suggestions for who we might include in our board of trustees and our officers. In particular, we are looking for the president-elect for 2023. So if you have someone in mind who you think would make a great president for the society, eventually they'll literally have 2 full years to train and to figure that out. The other thing that we are kind of desperately in need of is you might know that our fabulous treasurer and past president, Larry, he's done 2 full terms as treasurer, and our bylaws make it so that he can really only do 2 terms. So I have a couple of ideas of who our treasurer could be, but if you are the sort of person that loves doing accounting and knowing how the financial system works for the Orchid Society and are very, 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 very trustworthy, we'd like to hear from you and would be very, very interested in talking to you about the future. The other thing is that we are expanding our social media. We have a new member. Her name is Kate, and she's just waving to everyone right now. Kate Smith. I always feel like I want to ask her to sing "God Bless America," but she doesn't seem amused when I bring that up. So I'm going to leave that alone. But in any case, I'm sure I'm not. But in any case, she is an expert in social media content, and so we are now on Instagram and Twitter, and we're hoping to really expand our outreach as a result. So Dana is going to spearhead that along with Kate, and I believe we're forming a committee to deal with social media concerns. So if you would like to hear more and more about it,
same there.
let us know, and we'll put you in touch with that committee. Kate, do you want to say anything?
That says Robbie.
Sure.
Who's Robbie?
I'm Kate Smith. I have been working in web content creation and social media management for over 10 years. I've been off and on the Big Island for coming up on 20 years. And my husband and I just bought a house in Volcano. We're closing this week, so I'm going to be incredibly busy the next couple of weeks, kind of getting that taken care of. But I haven't met everyone, but it's been a pleasure to meet those that I have, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to participate. It's been fun so far.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you, and we did get some wonderful new members at our sale back at the end of July, and Kate is one new illustrious member. And are there any other new members that are here this afternoon? Okay, Steve, good to see you. Do you want to introduce yourself? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I'm Steve Nemeth. I'm a retired agriculture teacher in Hilo. I live in Pana Eva, and I've been growing orchids off and on for 40 years or so, among a lot of other plants.
Fantastic. Pana Eva, is that by the zoo? Where is Pana Eva?
sorry, not Pana Eva. Pi'i Honua. I'm above, up by the hospital. Pi'i Honua.
Ah, okay, wonderful. That's a beautiful area.
Yeah.
Our upcoming president, Carl, I don't know if he's here right now, lives in that area as well. So you have some really nice neighbors and just a really beautiful part of the island. So, okay. I think that we should go ahead right to hear James. And I want to like to introduce James because
Sorry.
oh yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm Shasta. I've been here before, but I just rejoined and my husband just joined. So
Hey, yes, I'm a new member. My wife signed me up. I'm an elementary school teacher. I teach first grade over at Mountain View Elementary, and super excited to be here. Awesome.
Oh,
Sorry.
awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you. I think I remember you from the show. You were very enthusiastic there. So, and you bought one of my potting mix bags. So I am very grateful. You're helping support us with that sort of thing. Double thumbs up for you. So, all right. Well, great. Welcome. And I love your background. Is there anyone else who would like to say hi to the group? All right.
Hi, I'm visiting from Honolulu. Doug Miller.
Oh, well, hello.
I'm a member of Honolulu Orchid Society, and they sent your Zoom meeting notice, and I thought I'd give it a try.
Well, thank you. Several of us like to attend your Honolulu meetings, so we're really glad we can return the favor from time to time. And welcome. I hope you enjoy today's presentation. In fact, I know you will. I know that because James Keach, Dr. James Keach, is a really amazing person. Someone who I think many of us on the Big Island remember him because he was here for several years working for the cooperative extension and is a very interesting guy. He worked for a long time with the Singapore Botanic Garden as a plant breeder, and he has extensive experience with plant breeding, and particularly in the genus Dendrobium, but really broad experience. James joined the judging center here in Hilo, and is now has just been elevated to associate judge, and we're really delighted for him. He and this is no mean feat, considering we've had a lot of difficulty meeting in person and training and all the things that we really do need to do to cultivate our judges. But the talk that you're going to hear today is about the genus Disa, which is a mostly African genus. And among the most spectacular orchids in the world. It's a plant that hardly anyone here grows. In fact, I would be really surprised if anybody that's in on the Zoom call actually has a plant other than myself. I have a couple. But it's also a plant that is, there's many species. There's tremendous diversity within it. It's a plant that mostly, well, I'll leave to James to talk about the culture, but it's a plant that you actually don't need to buy, to get in a flask. You can actually plant the seeds in sphagnum moss or peat and have them germinate. And they're, again, one of the more spectacular orchid genera. And so it will be, I think it's something that we've kind of missed out on growing here on the Big Island and in Hawaii in general. I do think it will be very, very interesting for all of us to think about the possibilities that we might have growing this very, very spectacular plant. So with that, James, I'd like you to go ahead. I think you are able to share your screen.
Yeah, let me just click it right now. And does that look good to everyone?
Looks fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom, for that introduction. And thank you, Tom and Larry, for inviting me, and for all of y'all for showing up too. You know, it's never much of a talk if there's no one to listen. So I'm always glad to have what also happens to be a lot of familiar faces here. Like Tom said, I lived in Hilo for a few years. I was a member of the Hilo Orchid Society. And while I like Kauai, I've got to say, I really do miss Hilo and many things, including the orchid culture there. As Tom also mentioned, I'm going to be talking today about Disa. And Disa is a genus that is, as Tom said, mostly in Africa. And it's interesting, it's a huge genus, but there's only a few species that we kind of see in cultivation. I'll be giving kind of an overview of it. It's actually named after a character from Swedish mythology, a queen who got caught in a net. And so you see this kind of striping. This is Disa uniflora. And these lines on what's actually a sepal here, this is the dorsal sepal. The person who was describing it thought that it looked like a net. And in Swedish mythology, Disa, the queen, got caught in a net and was carried off in it and became kind of one of the things she was known for. And so when they were describing this, they happened to be Swedish and said, well, hey, let's name it after her. And so name stuck. I thought I'd give a little bit of an intro of who I am just real quick. I know I've met quite a few of y'all before, but just so you wonder, how did Tom find this guy and why is he talking to us today? So my background, I've worked in plants for a while. I've done the whole gamut of edible crops to ornamental crops. I actually came to Hawaii originally in an internship about, over 15 years ago now, on Oahu with Tessie Amore, the dendrobium breeder at the university. I got a grant and was looking into the history of dendrobium breeding. I ended up doing my PhD eventually on impatiens, looking for downy mildew resistance. And this is a cross in the lower right that I made with some different species from Southern Africa. The parents are on either side and the cross is in the middle. And some of the work that I did with that is being carried on with my PhD advisor. So after that, I ended up doing a bunch of internships. I'd kind of traveled around for a bit. I started in orchids pretty young. I was about 10 years old. Worked at Arbeck Orchids in Maryland with Roger Cole. I'd gone in there to buy orchids and he asked me if I wanted a summer job and was lucky enough to, go on and help him repot and handle the front of shop a little bit. And then after I came to Oahu, I came back after the internship and got a job at Frankie's Nursery in Waimanalo. Worked there for a little bit shy of 2 years. Frank's an incredible guy. He developed the Melikalima pineapple that you see sometimes in Sack and Save without a crown, one of the sweetest pineapples on earth. And he also is a fruit collector and has traveled all over the world, bringing back different types of tropical fruit. If you're ever in Waimanalo, it's really worth going and visiting his place. And I think they also now sell stuff at the Kapiolani Community College Farmers Market. I worked at a Pioneer Hybrid in Kunia because as much as I loved Frank's, it didn't quite pay my rent. Pioneer was not really exciting, but it definitely paid the rent. And so that was worthwhile. But after that, I decided I needed to go back to school. It's when I went and did my master's and later my PhD. And then at the end of my PhD, I got a grant to go and intern in Thailand. And while I was in Thailand, I had to get my visa renewed every month or so. And so I did a lot of trips throughout Southeast Asia, one of which was to Singapore. And this was Gardens by the Bay was one of the places that have been suggested I visit. And these photos down here in the center are of that garden. It kind of grew out of the Singapore Botanic Garden. Singapore Botanic Garden's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and then eventually kind of took on its own life. And so working there, I got to kind of be involved with the outdoor stuff, but also a lot of orchid education. They sort of sell themselves as a horticultural theme park, and I won't go into too much about them today. I'll be giving a talk to the Cunha Orchid Society if y'all want to tune in on that next month. But they try to bring in things that kind of are eye-catching and really want, to get folks who might not be plant people hooked. And so the person who founded it, Keach Tan, is incredible guy, travels all over the world, bringing back unusual plants. They have a garden of variegated palm trees. They have another garden of palm trees that have 2 or 3 trunks each. They built these giant structures called super trees that are covered with different sorts of climbing plants and all sorts of theme gardens throughout there. It's my boyfriend and I up in one of the super trees. But the main reason I started working there was because they have a history of orchid breeding. So Singapore Botanic Garden has been breeding orchids for ages and ages. Gardens by the Bay is not even a decade old, so they're still kind of getting things going. But they already have some really impressive orchid crosses on the books. And I'd kind of taken a break from orchids while I was getting my degrees, so it was kind of nice to get back in there and see some of the stuff that had been going on. In the upper right, you can see an improved form of Arundina graminifolia. This is the one that we see all over Big Island, on the side of the road, the bamboo orchid. But they bred a compact form that only gets about 2 feet tall, but the flower is about twice the size. You can see a much bigger lip, much more intense color, and just really incredible. They had some other stuff in the pipeline. We also had a guy who bred Dendrobium victoria reginae, really nice kind of cerulean blue orchid, but hard to grow, highland, Philippines. But he crossed it with the pigeon orchid, Dendrobium cruminatum. These I saw a lot on Big Island as well. This is one that the flowers only last a day, but it flowers after rainstorms. And you'll see just this profusion of white blooms. And his idea was to get something that could grow in the hot climate of Singapore, but had kind of this nice color. And so he managed to get this hybrid down here at the bottom, named it after the director of the garden, Keach Tan. And then on the right, this is a miniature orchid that they were breeding so it could fit in a test tube, so that people who came and visited Singapore could then bring them back without having to go through all the restrictions that orchid plants get once you pull them out of a test tube. But anyway, I'll talk more about this in my Cunha talk, but just wanted to kind of get my street cred, as it were, in orchids, so that I'm just not pulling this all out of thin air. I worked there with the orchid community quite a bit. I was an editor for the Malayan Orchid Review. I gave talks at the Orchid Society of Southeast Asia meetings, and also did some social media postings for them. I miss it. Here we have 2 orchid societies on Kauai, but have not been meeting as regularly, unfortunately. I was really glad when Tom mentioned that you all were doing Zoom meetings like this, and that I could kind of get back into it. I always find it really invigorating to hear different people's experiences with orchids. But anyway, enough of my background. I'm going to talk to you all today about the genus Disa. As I mentioned, this is mostly from the southern part of Africa. I'll talk a little bit about the cultural overview, including how it grows in the wild, and then also some cultivation tips for if you're growing it outside of the wild environment. Talk about the flowers a little bit, kind of how they differ from some of the other orchids we're used to. Talk about taxonomy, some of the names, how some of that has changed. Get into judging. I'd originally developed this presentation as part of my judging accreditation that Tom mentioned, but I have expanded it a little bit and put in some things that I hope make it a little bit more interesting for a wider range of folks. I'll go over some of the notable species and talk about the hybrids, and then they always drill into you in the sciences, make sure you list your references. So I've tried to put references for all the information I have, as well as photo credit. And for those of y'all who joined early, there's a bit of a controversy about how to pronounce Disa. I had always heard Disa for years and years. And actually the first time I'd heard it was from a book that my dad was reading. I think it was one of their Horatio Hornblower or Master and Commander, one of those nautical series, and they talk about Disa grandiflora. And so I, ended up asking all of my orchid friends about it. But the last time I opened up Orchid Whiz, the, pinnacle sort of orchid software, it listed as Disa for the pronunciation. And I haven't gotten a clear answer. We were kind of chatting about it when I first signed on, trying to figure it out. But I'll be using Disa throughout this talk. And if you find a definitive source telling me to say Disa, please feel free to send it to Tom and he'll get it to me. This on the right is Atricopia. And this one, you can see a really sort of different flower than what I had on the first slide, right? I think Disas, I always sort of compare them with Phragmipediums because I think we tend to sort of focus on these bright oranges, yellows, peaches, sort of like we do with like Phragmipedium besseyi and its hybrids. But there's a whole range of sort of different colors and flower types out there. And I'll be sort of trying to highlight this as well as kind of what we see more often in cultivation. So Disa, most of the species that we hear about and that are kind of the showier flower types tend to be sort of wetland ones. You can see here a photo from in situ cultivation of them. I believe this is racemosa on the right, and then on the left, I think this is a form of uniflora, the one that was on the opening slide. But you can see growing right up on the edge of the water, sometimes with moving water around them, but typically a lot of water-loving species. There are species that are more dryland growing. Cardinalis, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is known for being kind of a dryland orchid. And you can actually see the caption here on racemosa that sometimes it's considered more of a like water-loving species, but occasionally fires will kind of go through and wipe out the plants. So it does pretty well. And I have some pictures in a slide or two of the tuberous roots that most of the species have that let them survive these fires and sort of re-sprout from it. So they prefer kind of a wet environment, but they have some adaptation to kind of survive as things change. If we get outside the native environment, a lot of folks try to kind of replicate that wet environment. The main thing, and this was something Tom and I had actually talked about and I learned a lot from him, is you want to keep the roots wet, but you also want to keep them cool. The top of the plant can get warm, but if the roots start getting warm, you tend to lose the plant. And they're pretty sensitive to water quality as well. I know if any of y'all grow some of the carnivorous plants, this is a big issue, right? If you use tap water on them, a lot of times their roots get roasted and they'll end up dying off. But with Disas also, they really like that kind of pure water, really clean. This is a bench setup that I found in one of the older publications where they actually have the circulating water going through into these tubs below the benches. And so they kind of keep the roots wet at all time, but they also keep them cool that way. Different sorts of mixes that people use, typically well draining because you have all that water, you don't want it to kind of get stagnant. So you see a lot of mixes that involve gravel, bits of sand, other things like that. And on the right here, you can see some of the roots that were pulled up, shoots forming at the top, and then these kind of tuberous roots going down. And actually the tuberous roots, some folks have investigated them. They're a source of maltodextrin, which might sound familiar because it's a sugar substitute. So it'd be a very high value way to replace your sugar, but you could do it. And they're supposed to have a little bit of like a gelatinous quality if you try to eat them too. One of the other key characteristics, as Tom mentioned, is Disas are really forgiving in terms of germinating their seeds. I think with a lot of orchids, we kind of think of them as having to grow up in flasks first, and this is great in terms of transporting them internationally because the flasks are sterile. But Disa seeds, you can just spread on the top of things like the sphagnum media, and they'll sprout up like this. This photo I actually grabbed from a Facebook group. And if you join the Disa Facebook group, they have all sorts of photos of people doing things like this, where they'll make crosses, get the seed, and then rather than sending it to a lab, just sprinkle some on their sphagnum. Sometimes they mix in some peat. You can see some perlite mixed in here. But as long as it's kind of kept wet enough and cool enough that you'll get pretty good germination that way. So it's relatively affordable in, compared to some of the other orchids where you need a lab setup to propagate them. flowers, I tell people to sort of think of it more as like a Masdevallia or a Lycaste. You know, we're in so many other orchids like Phalaenopsis or Cattleyas, we focus on those petals and those lips, you know, which are so big and so showy. And here, Disa's, the petals, yeah, you can sort of see them. They're right up there against the column, but they're not that showy. You know, they're sort of eclipsed by this big dorsal sepal at the top. And then the lip, I mean, it's almost an afterthought. You can barely make it out from the lateral sepals on either side of it. And this does vary across the genus. I'll talk about this a little bit later with some of the Cerulean species. But most of the time when you see folks talking about Disas, and especially the uniflora types, they're talking about these sepals. And I should say also, typically the lateral sepals tend to be normally the same color as each other, whereas the dorsal sepal will have this more brilliant sort of patterning. Sometimes it's this netting, like I described, but I'll get into a few other forms that have been bred. And on the right here, this is actually a US source for Disas. They were talking about, they like to think of the perfect Disa flower as an equilateral triangle that, you know, from the top of the dorsal sepal to the tips of the lateral sepals, you can draw it perfectly like that. So I mentioned that there's quite a few Disa species. Depends on kind of who you ask, how many there are, anywhere from 160 to 220, but lots of variation. They're spread out, again, mostly in Southern Africa, but they do go as far as the Middle East in some cases, and there's quite a few that are native to Madagascar. Again, Disas tend to be kind of these, we think of these big kind of showy forms, but there are smaller ones that are also found in different areas. And actually one of the ones, not this one on the bottom, but a close relative of it, Bracteata, was introduced to Australia and has become a weed there that has these kind of small, non-showy sort of reddish flowers. These don't tend to attract as many people to growing them. You know, it's just not kind of that same sort of appeal, but something at the top up here, like Flexuosa, might be something that people would be interested in. I'm going to be focusing mostly in this group that's highlighted in green over here on the left, Disa section Disa, and that's the one that includes uniflora and some of its close relatives. But I will kind of veer off a little bit for some other species. So this is Disa section Disa. You'll see uniflora, and I'll be talking about a few other species in here that have been used a lot in hybridizing, but I also wanted to bring up some others that haven't been used as much. And these are closely related enough that they theoretically could be bred with the Disa uniflora. And the way I kind of like to think about it is like dendrobiums. You know, a lot of times we'll see kind of these dendrobiums like the university has bred, like Jack Thomas or Jacqueline Concert, or even like a nobile type, but you won't typically see a hybrid of like kind of these nobile type dendrobiums with kind of these cut flower type dendrobiums. They're both dendrobiums, they're just distantly related. And so same thing, you know, if we get outside this Disa section Disa, you can theoretically make a hybrid with something in this section. It's just a little bit trickier, and the offspring might end up being sterile, kind of like a mule. But there's some beautiful flowers, and all of the flowers shown here at the bottom haven't been used in crosses. And I really think that's a shame, because I think that some of them are really spectacular in terms of coloration and shapes, and even flower counts like bivalvata over here on the right. Disa has been judged quite a bit in the US, but it's never really taken off as much as you might expect for flowers that are so showy and huge. It's received pretty much the whole range of awards, everything from the FCC, kind of the highest award you can get from the American Orchid Society, down to HCCs, all sorts of cultivation ones. And there's been awards going back to 1970, shortly after judging was sort of formally started in the US, but as recently as 2019. This is the one that was judged over here on the right. This is Disa tripetaloides Wally Orchid, and I'll be highlighting tripetaloides in a few slides from now. One thing to kind of keep in mind with judging though, you know, we tend to see names and kind of awards tacked on to the end of orchids that we see on the show tables. Almost every Disa that's been awarded is either uniflora or one of its hybrids. So I think out of 161, like something like 94% of them were ones that are descended from Uniflora. And any of the ones that are bolded here are descended from it. So it's all kind of skewing more towards, like I said, these sort of peach, red, and yellow tones. Statistics, I won't spend too much to talk about it, but just kind of wanted to give this so that you have an idea of what to expect if you're looking at Disas, or if you ever are fortunate enough to have the chance to grow some. A lot of them tend to have only one inflorescence on the plant. Typically, kind of you get that one inflorescence that comes up with a whirl of leaves. And then after that, that kind of whirl of leaves dies off and the next one will bloom. But once in a while, you'll get something over here, like on the right here. This is Uniflora Hyung-suk. And this one got 13 different inflorescences. And these flowers are pretty darn big too. So, you know, you think about this is 13 centimeters, and that's, well, I'm terrible at measurement, but, you know, go look at a ruler and you can get an idea. These are very large flowers. They do vary a little bit. The species tend to be smaller, but Uniflora itself is pretty large. And, you know, even just one kind of stately flower held on an inflorescence is really striking. Unfortunately, awards seem to be kind of tapering off. There haven't been a lot of Disas introduced to the US recently, but maybe we can change that. I don't know. Maybe Tom can get a group order going or something. I'd certainly participate in that. I'll talk a little bit now about some of the species and kind of go into what makes them special, what they've been used for, and then I'll start talking about some of their hybrids that they've been used for after that, and then kind of wrap up from there. So I've mentioned Uniflora now quite a few times. This was one of the earliest species described back in the 1700s. And like I said, it sort of dominates the genus. It's had all sorts of offspring bred, typically sort of is like the one on that first slide where it's sort of reddish with some orange and yellow tones, but people have selected for the full range. This is one that got an award of distinction over here on the right, Red Baron. I mean, it's kind of hard to see because, you know, computers tend to sort of oversaturate, but you can see almost no other color besides the red, you know, with just kind of sort of darker red netting on it. Really spectacular. They have seen some variation, and so folks have bred out sort of orange forms like here in the center. And then there's even some kind of pale yellowish white forms. And I haven't seen a true white yet for Uniflora, but folks have been trying to kind of get one going, and it's of great interest to people. Tons of hybrids made from all these different forms. And I'll talk a little bit, it tends to kind of pass on this netted sort of dorsal sepal up there, but it, you know, these are, again, huge flowers. And so people tend to kind of respond well and give them all sorts of awards. Disa tripetaloides, this one tends to have smaller flowers, but more of them, which is nice. So you get kind of a bigger show, as it were, and slightly more spread out. One of the things you can kind of see on the inset down here is it also has some specklin on the dorsal sepal and on the lateral sepals as well. And I tried to enlarge it, but, you know, it always gets a little bit grainier. You can also not really see it here, but even in ones like this Wally orchid on the right that looks pure white, there's still a little bit of spotting on the dorsal sepal. This tends to be a dominant trait, it looks like. Most of the hybrids that are made with tripetaloides end up with, instead of that kind of netting on the dorsal sepal, getting that spotting. But a few of them get kind of a mix of it, where you'll get both stripes and spots coming out together. And so folks are kind of trying to use that for breeding. And it was described quite a while ago, so it's been used for quite a bit as well. Cardinalis is one that was described a little bit more recently, 1980, so it hasn't been used as much. It has kind of that same sort of red tone. So not everyone has been kind of hopping on board because they say, oh, Uniflora is so great. Why do we want to kind of improve on a good thing? But I sort of think, again, like Phragmipediums, you look at Bessii and you have that kind of light reddish orange, but then you look at like Phrag sargentianum, where it's kind of this saturated, dark, muddy red. And Cardinalis has kind of this same trait where it's red, but it's a deeper, darker red. Again, more flowers per spike. It's not like Uniflora where you're just getting one or one at a time, but not as good form, tends to be smaller. It is a drier growing species. The one that I mentioned can grow pretty dry. And so I'd be curious to see more folks trying to work with this also as a way of making Disas a little bit more approachable for growing. I should say, I forgot to say it at the beginning, I've only grown Disas once, and it was when I was a teenager after my dad was telling me about the one he'd read in that book. And I kept it alive for a while, but getting the water quality, especially, when I was just trying to do it with collected rainwater, it just couldn't quite make it. And so I'm hopeful that, as we see some other species like this introduced, maybe it'll help kind of improve the cultivation abilities. Racemosa is one that was described quite a while ago as well. And this has been used quite a bit in breeding also, probably almost just second to Uniflora. It tends to be kind of these pinkish magenta flowers, a little bit rounder, not quite as stretched out as Uniflora, where there's kind of a gap between the sepals. You can see this almost looks like a solid equilateral triangle. And one interesting thing about this is there is a pure white or an alba form described. There was a whole article written about it. Everyone was really excited. And I looked and looked to see if anything had been done with it. And as far as I can tell, it just sort of disappeared. And so unfortunately, I haven't seen anything kind of come out of it. But I'd love to see some work done with that. As I mentioned, a lot of folks are looking for a pure white form of Uniflora, and this would be a way to kind of breed it in. It does tend to have more of the sort of the Uniflora habit where it's just one flower at a time and then sort of opens successively though, instead of several flowers at once. And then this is a more recently described species, described in 1993, so it hasn't been used as much in breeding for it. But while Uniflora has kind of nice sort of yellow forms, where they tend to be a little pale and more white, this is more of kind of that rich buttery yellow that I think people tend to like, sort of reminds them of a daffodil or something. Smaller, again, and has some spotting, kind of like tripetaloides on the dorsal sepal. So I haven't seen a lot of good photos to kind of show if that ends up coming through. But I think in terms of color-wise, this one has some just real potential for bringing out some of those yellow tones in Uniflora and then maybe improving the flower counts. And it's been awarded a handful of times too. So hopefully Orado will start getting out into cultivation more. No talk about Disas would be complete without talking about the Cerulean species. This is something that pops up on orchid forums across the internet all the time. You can get into debates about whether Cerulean is truly blue or not, but certainly this is a striking color combination. You can imagine that a bee seeing this would be very attracted to it. There's all sorts of different ones, and they're found in different sections within the genus Disa. So they're distributed all over the place, different sorts of shapes. And one of the things that's interesting on these compared to sort of the Uniflora types is they tend to have larger lips. Like you remember when I pointed out the Uniflora at the beginning, you could barely see the lip. It was just this little sliver. But look at the lip on Purpurescens here, that really sort of saturated picotee, sort of dark purple around the edge, and then these sort of landing stripes going into it. And I should say, pollination-wise, Disa has been studied a lot, and all the different species seem to have their own special pollinator. And it's the whole gamut of insects as well as birds. There are ones that are pollinated by butterflies like Uniflora, moths, flies, carpenter bees. I believe some of these are carpenter bee pollinated, and then also sunbirds, sort of like our native Evie. So you can see how this almost looks like something that a bee might mistake for kind of a backside of another member of its species and kind of have it going in, but really sort of spectacular. And these actually, because of this really amazing color, there's been a lot of interest in bringing that into the Uniflora types. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, they tend to be in other sections in the genus, and so hybrids are a little bit difficult to make, but there have been a few successes. And these, I was fortunate enough to get copies of the South Africa Orchid Society's bulletins from John Jusek in the Judgment program. And he passed me these that have photos of some of the hybrids that have been developed. So I tried to list the parents here in the center, but you can see just some really wild, almost like Technicolor sort of things coming out of these crosses. Lugens here in the center, which has sort of pale forms, but has this great sort of fuzzy lip, almost like a Rancholalia debiana, and then crossed with something like Longocornu. You don't get as much fuzz on the lip, but you do get kind of this nice flat sort of landing strip, and you get this great sort of cup top, the dorsal sepal with all this great veining on it. On the other hand, they used a darker form of Lugans, nigrescens, cross that with graminifolia. And you get some of the cerulean in the center, but you get this really wild, like almost eye-splitting sort of magenta color that came out of it. Again, sort of reduced fuzz on the lip, but some nice lines and these great sort of Mickey Mouse ears coming out on the petals there. So I'd love to see some more being done with this. Again, these are hybrids that aren't related to Uniflora, so people haven't seemed to kind of pick them up as much. But there was one cross that was successful trying to breed with something related with Uniflora. And this was a cross of Tripetaloides, the one I mentioned earlier, crossed with Longocornu, one of the Cerulean species I pointed out before. This is Evening Shadows, registered by Pathfanatics, those folks who are famous for making all those wild path or lady slipper crosses. And you ended up with this really sort of sky blue kind of colored plant here in the middle. It won an award just to sort of distinguish these really amazing flowers. It didn't kind of do as well as I would expect, but then I was looking it up, comparing those average scores I showed earlier for awards with what this cultivar, Junebug, got. And I think the problem was it's just not as large a flower as what people are used to seeing when they think of something like Uniflora. You do get this really amazing color. You get several flowers. I mean, I would buy that plant in a heartbeat, but since it's not kind of as big and sort of show-stopping that way, unfortunately, I think it didn't quite make it into the public masses yet. But there's hope, and I know there's been some interest in trying to breed on from this. I haven't seen anyone actually succeed with it, but I always have my fingers crossed that something will come out of it. So, Cerulean hybrids on the way, but not quite there yet through Disa. I'll get into some of the other hybrids now that have been used. As I mentioned, Uniflora itself was described quite a while ago, and Disas are among some of the first hybrid orchids to have registered hybrids. The first one registered was Veitchii, and this is Uniflora, kind of that big reddish orange one I discussed, crossed with Racemosa. And you can see that Racemosa gives it kind of this pinkish light magenta color and also sort of rounds it out a little bit. It does end up being a little cupped like Peaches and Cream over here on the right, but it has kind of these nice sort of soft sort of pastel art shades that I think are really pleasing. And you can see also the netting sort of turns into a little bit of spotting as well as netting over here, which is kind of neat, and even fades away in some crosses. It's been used a lot in breeding, crossing back to either parent or crossing with other combinations, 365 progeny from it, and 10 different awards. So this is really kind of one of the foundational crosses for modern Disa breeding. Cuensis was, I think, the second registered hybrid of Disa back in 1893 from the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew. And this is Uniflora with Tripetaloides, that one that I showed earlier that has all those spots on the dorsal sepal. So you can see looking across these, you remember I mentioned it tends to be a dominant trait. Every single one of these, that spotted dorsal sepal, instead of kind of the netting that Disa actually get its name from. There's been all sorts of kind of remakes of this to get different colors. Tripetaloides tends to be a kind of pale, whitish, like very soft pink. And so you end up with some that are kind of like this light sort of pink, but then also using forms of Uniflora that are a little bit darker, you get kind of this darker coloration. And the other nice thing is you get a lot more flowers open at once. Veitchii that I showed you on the previous slide, you saw it was mostly one flower at a time. These, they get that kind of more free flowering trait from the Tripetaloides, but it does tend to shrink the flowers down. And as different forms of Uniflora and Tripetaloides have been found, they've remade it and gotten some nice color ranges, kind of like this pale sort of orange-yellow one in the center. Now getting into a little bit more of kind of complex ones as we sort of branch out from these primary hybrids. So Helmut Meyer was actually a big name in the Disa world. He unfortunately passed away a while ago, but they named a hybrid after him while he was still around. This is Uniflora crossed with Cardinalis, that kind of smaller red one, and then back crossed to Uniflora. And you can see the Uniflora really dominates the shape and the color, but you get more flowers open at once, which is really nice. There's a little bit of kind of variation also in terms of the different types of the colors. And when I first gave this presentation, I was talking with Tom about this flower here in the center, trying to figure out what is going on, with these streaks down here on the lateral sepals. And I thought, oh, that's some great breeding work. And he said, that might be thrip damage. So kind of up to you, to kind of debate on it. But again, Cardinalis kind of in the background seems to be bringing out this really nice sort of saturated dark red here, as well as increasing the kind of open flower count number. Hold on, I'm having a minor computer challenge here. Okay, there we are. Disa foam is one that's kind of a more complex hybrid. It's basically a lot of uniflora with a little bit of racemosa in the background. I think there might be one other species. But the distinguishing thing with Disa foam is this is the hybrid that got the FCC, that kind of distinguished highest award you can get from the American Orchid Society. You can see, again, lots of uniflora in the background, but really nice presentation in terms of the flowers are flat. You can see all parts of them and more flowers open at a time, like on the one on the right with apricot. I mentioned earlier with the cultural things that normally when the plant flowers, the growth will sort of die off. This is one that Tom actually said he knew the person who got the award here for the cultural award for foam. And the unique thing about this plant was that it kept the growths even after it had flowered. And so because of that, it was able to form this beautiful specimen plant. They had it hanging like this, which is not at all how I thought Disas could be grown, but they managed to get this great plant and got not only a cultural award for it, but also an FCC. And these actually ended up being sort of separate times. I believe it got the FCC first for these really nice sort of saturated color, and then the same clone later on, grown out a little bit more, got this CCM. But it's been used in breeding a lot because of both the unique growth habit and with these really, really striking, beautiful, flat, kind of saturated colored flowers. And I think, oh yeah, there we are. So I mentioned, it was basically a lot of uniflora. This is the pedigree of foam. So you see racemosa way back in the background, that veitchii that I talked about. And so crossing veitchii back to uniflora, getting Dioris, and then crossing back again to uniflora and getting Betty's Bay, and then cross into uniflora again. And that's how you end up with foam over here on the left. But, just that little bit of variation from the racemosa that tends to kind of flatten out, or that tends to kind of round out the shape a little bit, got you this really nice sort of foam that ended up winning all these awards. So with that, that's pretty much what I have in terms of just an intro to the genus Disa. Like I said, I'm still learning more about it. I hope this has sparked some interest for you all. These are some of the references I used, and I know this is being recorded, so you can look these up. If you're a member of the AOS, they have quite a few articles on Disa in the old journals. They also have some in Orchid Digest, if you can get a copy of the older ones. And then the South African Orchid Society has some really great articles. I am working on putting together in order to get some plants to try out over here on Kauai. There are a few distributors in the US for Disa, but bringing plants into Hawaii, we always have to be a little cautious. We don't want to introduce something that has something else piggybacking on it. And again, more references and acknowledgements. And with that, I'll end, but I also wanted to show, as I was kind of doing my background reading for this presentation, I just stumbled across these two plants. The one on the left has not been awarded as far as I can tell, but it seems to have kind of some sort of Peloria mutation where that dorsal sepal has started to kind of stretch its patterning down onto the lateral sepals. I don't know if this is stable or not. I wasn't able to find more information. I haven't reached out to Gareth Wills to find out about it. But if so, I think this could be a big game changer. And then over here on the right, the one that I pointed out earlier where maybe it was thrift damage, maybe it was a virus, maybe it was something else. Well, whatever it was, they managed to get a stable form of it, registered as Diablo Lightning, and actually got a JC for this kind of really neat striping that's coming out on the dorsal sepals. So another thing to kind of look out for. And I hope that, with some of this, you get some interest in the genus Disa. I'm happy to take questions. And before I forget, I can go back to this slide, but if you have a chance, we just got our civil rights audit. And so we've been asked to collect demographic data. If y'all are willing to fill out a quick survey, it's 4 quick questions. It'll help me keep some federal funding, but totally optional. And with that, happy to take questions, talk story with y'all, anything.
Well, James, that was a really wonderful tour of a really fabulous genus, and one that I think we could probably grow pretty well in the Hawaiian Islands, because especially in places like Hilo, in particular, if you have a little bit of elevation as well to keep things a little on the cool side. So I'm very curious where you're placing some orders, and perhaps some other adventurous people in the Hilo area would like to go in on it with you. Maybe make it a little bit easier to get plants. There are some other places. There's places where you can get seed of Disa if you want to try and do that, but of course that's a long-term thing. One of the things that I will say about it is that they will be, when they're grown, they actually could be a fabulous commercial cut flower crop, because those flowers on Disa uniflora will last 3 months in a vase. It's really quite extraordinary. So anyway, are there questions? Let me get into
James, this is Larry. I think you need to unshow your screen so we can see people that have questions.
That's true. Yeah. Otherwise, we can't see everyone.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
No, I do it all the time. Are there some questions for James? Anyone? Ellen, please go ahead. You need to unmute. Unmute, Ellen.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. On your QR code, it says what program or activity was attended. Do you have a title for that?
You can put Hilo Orchid Society, and that should be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for filling it out. Yeah, and sorry, I'm just looking in the comments now too. Sorry, I'm bad at multitasking that. I don't have sources for them yet. I know Aphrodisa, who I showed that photo from, does some sales. I've seen some folks online offering them for sale. I'm still kind of pulling it together. I'm going up for contract renewal in the next month or two, so I'm trying to focus on that, but I'd really like to get an order together. Seed, like Tom said, is easier to kind of bring in, but I think we could probably bring plants in, especially if they're already in the US. And I know of at least 2 or 3 sources that are registered selling some.
There's a fellow by the name of Hilo Orchid, and you saw several plants that were awarded for him that he grew. He often has Disa seed available as well as young plants. I do not have his contact information right now, but if there are a few of you that are interested in pursuing that, maybe we can do a group order with him as well.
Awesome.
Just send me your interest, and I'll try and put something together.
Oh, sorry. I see a question in the chat about let's see, sources for seeds. limited distribution, is this a newly evolved genus? There's some really interesting articles, scientific articles about that, and some discussion of it. I'm not great in terms of timelines for evolution. I know it does seem to have evolved to the point that they said it's each species and tends to have its own specific, that is to say, its own other species that pollinates it. It doesn't have a broad pollinator base. So there does seem to be at least some evolutionary history that's allowed it to specify down to that point. I believe there's also been some evidence about how fires in its native habitat have kind of shaped evolution. I'm blanking on the name of the article, but I have it in my references collection. If you want to reach out to me, I can put my email. I am unfortunately going in for surgery on Monday, so I'll be kind of slow on the emails. Well, I'm always slow on the emails, but if you want to reach out to me, I can get that paper to you.
You've got a lot going on, James.
I try.
I heard a talk by a fellow named Stephen Johnson, who has done a lot of pollination research, and he's based in South Africa. And he reported how a population of these Disa somehow started moving higher up, and as they moved higher, the flowers changed, and insofar as, I guess, the more successful ones to breed were attractive to birds, which often happens at a higher elevation. So a butterfly pollinated Disa, as it moved into an upper elevation, needed a warm-blooded pollinator. The flowers changed, but not enough for them to consider making a new species out of it, even though the pollinator changed as the plant traveled up the side of the mountain. I think it's really interesting that you can see evolution in action sometimes with some of these species when you study them closely. Larry, you have a question?
Well, yeah, so James, I'd just like to ask you about if we did get a group order and if people have these to grow, just some tips on how to grow them. And in particular, because of what you mentioned and what I've read about how they need very, very pure water, is fertilizer a problem? Like, you know, if you give them too much fertilizer?
You know, I believe it is, and I'm trying to remember. I've seen some sort of different things about it. I know that anecdotally, what I've seen from different Disa growers online is they tend to kind of be cautious with their fertilizing, because they said they've had a few cases where applying fertilizer, you know, they worry a plant's growing too slow. They'll put fertilizer on, it's a little bit too much, and that messes up the kind of water quality and tends to kill the plant. There's some forgivingness, you know, and again, it depends a little bit on media too. You know, sometimes, like I've seen folks grow them in live sphagnum. And so, you know, if you're doing that, then you have a live substrate that has some buffer with that, as opposed to like inorganic media, like if you're using gravel. But most of what I've seen has been kind of using purified water of some sort, and then just limited amounts of re-adding the nutrients. I don't know, like one thing I'm not sure about also is like acid rain, like if you have VOG or anything like that, because I know rain collection and catchment systems are a great way to sort of get pure water normally. I don't know how much that might affect things. I know Roy Tokunaga over at H&R has been touting reverse osmosis water for years now. Unfortunately, it's a little bit prohibitive for large scale sort of use, but it's I know he said that when he started using it, even on plants that aren't considered sensitive to water, he's gotten some better results. But he's also in Waimanalo and gets a bit of salt spray, so that might have something to do with it as well.
And also hardly anyone on Oahu uses catchment. So, you know, we have that advantage. So many of us collect our rainwater, and rainwater is just a gift from God when it comes to growing orchids. It's like flipping a switch. And that's one reason we do so well, I think, in the Hilo area, growing our orchids.
I have to say, you know, one of the hardest things orchid-wise moving to Kauai, besides not having as many vendors to feed my addiction with here, I also had to get used to actually watering orchids, which in Hilo was something I think I did maybe 3 times in the years I lived there. But, you know, just adjust with new climates and all that.
Any other questions for James? Well, James has left his email contact in the chat. If you're interested in getting in touch with him or possibly going in on an order with him for seeds or young plants of Disa in the future, I know that I will. And maybe we can have a small Disa lovers group here in Hawaii. And I think it's a very worthwhile genus to grow. You know, if you have good water, they are considered actually to be pretty easy to grow. So let's get these fantastic plants as part of our Hawaii orchid palette. I think it'd be a great thing for us all.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, and Larry for inviting me. You know, it's always fun to chat about a new type of orchid, you know, again, feed that addiction and try out something new. So, and maybe we'll learn something that other folks haven't too, in terms of growing it. You know, as you said, we're sort of blessed with some really great conducive environments here for it.
Indeed we are. Okay, well, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Walter Sheeran used to grow them up, Ahualoa, up above Honokaa. He had Disas, and he talked to the Kona Society probably 20 years or more ago about them, and he sold plants at the time, but I don't know whatever happened to his whole collection.
So there you go. We have precedent of Walter Sheeran, a very beloved figure here on the Big Island, of growing these plants apparently well enough to be able to sell them to other people. So it's something that sort of died away and would be really nice to bring it back. I know there are a few other commercial growers that have an interest in them too. So let's see what we can do. Glenn, I think you should grow them in your free time. So because you live in I think maybe the perfect place to grow them well.
Yeah, thank you. I've killed my share already.
Oh, that's not encouraging, Glenn. All right, so I don't know if people need a break. You can take a break whenever you want, I suppose. But at this point, if people have beautiful plants that they'd like to show and tell, let's go for it. I know Jeff has more plants. Come on. You have to unmute yourselves if you're going to talk.
I have to.
We're going to try and do.
Okay, one at a time. Go ahead, Jeff and Dorothea. You have to unmute.
Oh, okay, there.
Okay. So let's see what the camera's doing. What are we seeing? Can you see that?
Well, it's really far away.
Okay.
You want to bring it, can you possibly bring it closer to the?
There.
What are you cultivating monkeys now?
Yeah. Yeah, albino monkeys.
Very
And
nice snow monkeys.
and I got another one that's right here combined with Ornithophora.
Raise it up a little bit. You see this?
Raise up the camera.
Yeah,
Okay.
raise your whole thing
Raise
up a
the
little
plant
bit.
up.
Yeah. No, now it's too low. Look.
Oh,
Okay, there. Okay.
Look at all those beautiful orchids in the background. Wow.
Show me.
yeah. Here's a Gutifera or Gutulatum type of
Bulbophyllum
bulbo.
gutulatum.
Yeah, it's a hybrid of some sort.
Dorothy,
No, that's a species.
Dorothy,
Well,
if you could mute your machine because we're getting
an echo.
we're getting an echo from both
Okay.
of them, and leave Jeff's machine unmuted.
and this one I need a little help with. What is it?
That is another bulbophyllum.
Okay, that's what I thought, but
I'm trying to remember the species name of it, but it's definitely a bulbophyllum. Very nice plant, incredibly well bloomed.
yep. Yeah, look at it. And a Sisweinthia.
Oh, good pronunciation.
Well, I'm part German, I guess.
Ah,
I had to show you this. It's a little old right now, but I'm growing it on a lava bomb.
wow. That's a beauty mark.
Yeah, I think so. And my Gongora is back again this month. And another bulbo. This is the grandiflorum.
Yes.
Can't see it.
Okay. And this is another hybrid. This is
Raise it.
and then deny by moon poison raspberry.
Moon poison raspberry. Who makes up these names?
I don't know. They're not American, I don't think. Or English speaking, maybe. And this one I need some help with.
Boringiana.
Okay, it has 3 leaves.
Yeah, Guarianthe boringiana used to be Cattleya boringiana. This is the time of year for them.
Oh, it's not a Cattleya anymore. What is it?
Guarianthe.
Guarianthe. Okay.
Which means gua is the Nahuatl Indian word for tree. So guacamole and all these things that come from trees have begin with that. So gua. And guaria is the name in much of Central America for an orchid in general. Okay, guaria is like an epiphyte. Okay, so guarianthe means epiphytic. Anthe means flower in Greek. So it's combining the Indian word with the Greek word, and I think it's an actually beautiful name for the genus. So even though it's not a Cattleya, most of the bifoliate Central American plants that we used to call Cattleya are now guarianthes. So this is one of them, Guarianthe boringiana.
Boringiana?
Mm-hmm.
B-O-O?
No. Like B-O-W, like a bow.
Oh, okay.
Ring, like a ring. I-A-N-A. So boringiana.
Boringiana. Okay, good. And I have a Sumatrana, I think.
Wow. Very, very nicely bloomed. Beautiful plant.
Yeah. This is out almost the end of its bloom this time. Got a couple little ones coming, but
aren't they successive bloomers?
They are, but it's only two. What I've seen is only 2 flowers per stem.
Okay.
So far, anyway, that's what I've seen. And little Sophronites of some sort, we're not sure. And that's something in the background there.
Wonderful cattleyas. Oh, look at that. I see the Prismaticarpa.
Oh,
Prospecia prismaticarpa.
Uh-huh, yes.
That's a very beautiful species.
Nothing gets by you, does it? No.
Okay. Lots of things get by me.
And this, I don't know what it is either, but it's great.
I agree. I think you should just name it like Claudia or something. And
there's another something. I don't know what it is either. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I do. Nope. Oh, it says Kadama or something Kadama.
Kadama is a breeder, and probably it came from his breeding program.
All right.
In Japan.
Okay. Well, that's my assemblage here today.
Wow. Well, thank you for bringing so many great plants. Really, really lovely. And now the rest of us are like ashamed. But we have to get over that. If you please, you know, if you have something else you'd like to show, Kathy has her hand up. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, I had to have my husband go out and get it out of the tree because I can't walk for it that far right now. But it's sort of losing its glaring from the lamp. But anyway, it's a miniature Phalaenopsis. It's Caribbean Sunset Cross Minus is what it said. It's from Norman's Orchids in Southern California. Yeah, get it. It's got light lavender lips. And you can see the size of the flowers are very tiny, but it's real cute. And it's hanging out in a shrub in the side yard.
What size net pot is that?
I have it in the pot it came in. I just put them in there so I can hang them. I stick them in net pots to hang them up after I punch holes in the sides of the other one, and it's still in moss. We've had great cloudy weather, but really no rain to speak of for over a week. So they're fine. They don't get too much water.
Okay. You're just going to show one? I know you have more. Okay. Kathy Gallagher, I see your hand up. What did you bring?
Okay, so this one, see how I potted it?
Wow.
I put an ohia branch in a bonsai pot, and see how the roots love it?
Absolutely. The roots have lots of freedom and lots of air.
And here is the flower. It just opened yesterday. I think it's going to open bigger.
Yeah, it'll probably stretch out a little bit more, but what a fantastic lip. Look at that lip. It's gigantic.
It's a Siam red. That's what it says.
We believe you.
Okay, and then this one, I don't know what it is. Look at look at the color.
Fantastic. So that's.
And look at how the stem is. It's really weird.
Well, it's only weird to non-Miltonias. This is Miltonia Morelliana. It used to be Miltonia spectabilis variety Morelliana, but that's they've recently decided that Morelliana is its own species. And it's a very, very beautiful thing. Grows very, very well here. And that one has superb colors, absolutely superb.
And it's yellow. The bulb, the pseudobolts are yellow.
Yeah, that often happens when the plant is grown in high light, but it seems to really like it. Your plant is beautiful and very, very, very lovely, very dark, intense
Yeah,
colored
most
flowers.
wonderful.
Well done.
Thank you.
That one's often fragrant too, I believe.
I think so. Yeah, and there's many Miltonia spectabilis. There's many forms of it. There's alba ones and semi-alba ones and pink ones, and so it's one that you can collect more of since you do well with it. Would anyone else like to show a plant? Oh, Steve. Go for it, Steve.
If you
Oh.
wait, I want to move my computer and show you the plant. It's on a tree.
You can't bring the tree inside and show us?
I wish. I'll see if I can show you this.
One of the nice things about doing a Zoom meeting with your phone, you can just sort of walk around, huh?
Okay. How close am I? Can you?
We see your smile, your handsome face, but not the plant.
Okay, am I going up or down? Can you see the papaya? They are.
We're seeing right now. We're seeing your thumb and some power lines. There's the papaya.
Below the power lines?
Yeah, below. You need to move your. You need. We can barely see just the very tip top of the papaya tree.
The flowers are the orchid is about 30 feet long. It has sprays about 4 or 5 feet. The flowers are orange with purple spots and white center. And
Well, we really can't see it, but what you're describing sounds like arachnus or the spider orchid.
Thank you.
Okay. That was an interesting trip. Thank you. I think literally he may have actually tripped. Hopefully he's okay. Who else would like to show some plants? No more hands being raised. So
just a follow-up from the last meeting.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So I think Hilo Center Art Show was mentioned.
Yes. I don't think Carl is here, but my understanding, yeah, we really were looking forward to doing some small displays at the art center. But apparently, since the new COVID spike, that's been postponed. The show, which was to be called Mosaics, has been put aside for now, as have all kinds of things. The zoo plant sale is being postponed. The Beyond plant sale, the Big Island Association of Nurseries sale, has been postponed. So we were very lucky to get in our plant sale when we did, when things were still, when we weren't so worried about the COVID spike. If I can just say that my great hope is that we'll get this under control soon, and that people will cooperate and that we can start getting back to normal and having all of our orchid fun like we deserve soon. So let's all make sure we get vaccinated and take care of ourselves and show our aloha for each other.
Reason I brought it up, it got me thinking back 6 decades in plant pressing. And so
Wow.
I found blotting paper over at the art store above Home Depot in Kona,
Okay.
and made a plant press
Very nice.
and experimented. And here's some of my first results here. This one didn't quite come out all that well. And
Practice
this one's
makes perfect, though. Oh my
Yes.
goodness,
not bad for a first result.
that's
patterns.
fantastic. Silaginy.
And this is, I like the colors on this.
Very, very
So-
beautiful.
I'll have to work on it still, but
Well, bravo.
thank you.
Very nice to see that, and that people are thinking artistically and capturing their orchids for posterity. And who knows, maybe I know that there's one of the herbariums in Washington D.C., the herbarium for the National Arboretum, is actually collecting herbarium specimens, pressed plants and flowers like you're doing, for not just species but orchid hybrids. It's one of their missions, to try and have records of all of the hybrids that have been made, not just the species. And like there's only 30,000 species. That's not enough for them. They need to devote like entire herbarium rooms just to orchid hybrids. So
How do they
say that again?
How do they preserve the color? Sometimes
Well,
keep the color.
it's tough to do, but if you should be able to preserve color reasonably well with your plant press, and very, very good quality paper. If you are looking to make it just a little bit more artistic and a little bit more vibrant, you could probably use a little preservative when you when you press it, and that might maintain some of the color a little bit better.
What preservative?
Well, something like rubbing alcohol or.
Wouldn't that cause the color to fade?
Not if it's pressed immediately.
Okay.
And I think there are other types of things that you can use to preserve the color a little bit better. I haven't really done much of this kind of work myself, but I'm sure that there is a whole genre of flower press art. And I would imagine that your craft store would have some good suggestions for you on how to preserve the colors.
Oh, yeah, I found some of it on YouTube. I wasn't aware that preservatives work. With fish, the color tends to fade out.
Yeah, with formaldehyde and that sort of thing. Yes.
Yes.
I don't know the details of how they do it, but it's getting to be a big industry in Taiwan and Thailand right now. And quite a few orchid places I've seen over there in their sales area also are selling vases of dried orchid flowers where they've managed to actually keep the color true to type. They said, some of the things like Vanda cerulean hybrids were the hardest ones, but I've been impressed. I have a friend who works in Thailand at one of the orchid farms that her husband owns, and they're almost the exact same color as what you see on the plant now. But I don't know the technology behind it.
Must be liquid nitrogen, which we don't have.
No, because they keep them at room temperature, so I'm not sure how. But when we can travel again, something to think about.
Yeah.
Maybe the flowers are freeze dried fresh and that maintains the color when they're dried out. Who knows?
Oh, that's liquid nitrogen.
Yeah.
Check with Ben Franklin or look online at Joann's because that's popular in the craft stores or Michael's online.
Okay.
So Michael's and Joann's would be online because they're mainland, and then Ben Franklin here. But there'll be somebody that specializes. They all have their thing.
I've always found the people at Ben Franklin to be really knowledgeable about their products. So I'm sure you can get some good advice there. Okay. Well, yes.
Tom, I have one book that I want you to know and have. Do you have this book?
Orchid seed diversity. No, I don't think I've even seen that book.
And I got one of the author's signatures in it too, from Berlin Dahlem in Germany. And here is it. Pictures of the seeds.
Wow.
It's fascinating to see every wrinkle of the seed. Orchid seed diversity, a scanning electron microscopy survey. And it's absolutely fascinating.
It is.
Every wrinkle of the seed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, don't take any close-up pictures of me because you'll see every wrinkle on me too. So,
Well, I did not intend to do that.
oh, good.
I have done that in the past, you know.
Well,
I didn't go to your wrinkles at that time.
What's your secret, Alice? You don't seem to have any wrinkles at all.
Well, thank you. Anyway, I'm trying.
Okay, well, thank you for showing us that. That's fascinating book.
But
I'll have to look for it.
So try to look into it.
Okay. That we will do.
Here's that funny number. Well, you can't see it. I would. So, but
okay.
Orchid seed diversity.
Orchid seed diversity. For those of us that are interested in that, it looks like it's a whole new rabbit hole to enter that we might never escape from.
Pardon?
Oh, I was just saying that the whole subject of orchidology is so vast and so many aspects, and now it's seed diversity as well as flower diversity and plant diversity and pollinator diversity and grower diversity. Where the orchid world is really, really a very, very big world.
I paid yours for that thing. Ha ha.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no more plants to show today, I'll just wanted to give you guys all a very hearty thank you for attending today. James, thank you for a really beautiful and eye-opening presentation. Let's see if we can get some a Disa group going here in Hawaii, and I'm in, and I think a couple other people have expressed an interest in growing them as well if we can get the seeds. So with that, I thank you all and see you in a month. Aloha.
Thanks, everyone.